This week, our country looks back and remembers the tragic events of 9/11. We remember the pain, the heartache, the disaster, and the reaction. During the confusion and uncertainty, some wondered, could Houston be next? And were we safe? Tonight, we look at what went on behind the scenes in Houston while the nation was under attack. And we ask what policies and procedures are in place today should another act of terrorism happen. Join me as we explore emergency management, safety, and Homeland Security in the Gulf Coast region. I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Mark Sloan, Coordinator, Harris County Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Captain Marcus Woodring, Senior Managing Director, Port of Houston and Emergency Operations, Port of Houston Authority. And Dennis Storemski, Director of the Mayor's Office of Public Safety and Homeland Security, the City of Houston. Before we start, remember you can share your thoughts throughout the show on Twitter using hashtag Houston8. And welcome, gentlemen. First question off is I'd like to know where you were on 9/11, both personally and professionally.
I was at home watching TV when the first plane hit, and then obviously when the second plane hit, we knew something was wrong. So at the time, I was an executive assistant chief with the Houston Police Department, and we were struggling to determine what we needed to do to protect the city. We didn't know whether this was the first wave of multiple attacks throughout the country. So we began to determine what were our most vulnerable areas and began taking steps to prepare in the event we had an attack.
Mark?
I was in the private sector and basically was watching television in the kitchen at the operations I was working at and was amazed at what was actually unfolding. Didn't realize what was really happening until you saw that second plane fly into the World Trade Center.
Yeah. And Captain?
I was on active duty with the Coast Guard stationed in Key West at the time, and we had a little command center down there for the Florida Keys. The controller on watch called me and said, hey, you need to get in here. They were monitoring the TV, had seen the first plane fly into the building, and as we all stood there watching it, obviously the second plane flew into the building. At that point, the phone started to light up with calls from our command in Miami.
So how, in a situation like 9/11 at that time, do we break down who does what? I mean, it's interesting. I never even think of the police in a situation like that. I think military. But you folks are the first responders. You're right here. Or the Coast Guard. What was the division, and how did you know what to do at that time?
Well, you know, there's an old saying that disasters are like politics. Everything is local. And so a police department is responsible for protecting its public and responding to incidents. So, we immediately, because towers were attacked, we began looking at our downtown office buildings, and we began communications with the downtown management district and worked with Metro to make sure that they turned around their bus service so that by noon we had buses rolling out of town with people who would normally go home at 5 o'clock. So I would say by mid-afternoon, downtown was empty.
Yeah, and for the Coast Guard?
The first call we got said we need to protect all the bridges. And as you can imagine, in the Florida Keys at the time, there's hundreds of bridges, and we were incapable of protecting all the bridges. We asked, well, can you give us something a little more specific, a little something to go on? I think at first no one knew exactly what had happened, exactly what the target was, so we tried to protect everything, and that was obviously an impossible task.
When you say the bridges, and it might be an obvious question, but why protect the bridges? What is the significance of securing those? Is it to be able to keep flow of people through areas? Is it what's the reasoning?
Again, it was infrastructure. The World Trade Center in New York City had been attacked. They didn't know trains, planes, bridges, whatever the infrastructure may be. So it was really our first reaction was to protect whatever infrastructure we could. And the biggest infrastructure you have in the Florida Keys are the bridges that connect the islands to the mainland.
And Mark, I'm going to ask you to look back from what your knowledge is today of what's going on, but look back to 9/11. How does the county become involved? How do they know at the time that this was going on what the county should be doing?
Well, it's coordinating, it's communications, and it's working with local jurisdictions throughout not only Harris County, but the region, and communications throughout the state, and understanding roles and responsibilities. Obviously all law enforcement, become very keen and aware of what's happening and coordinating their efforts throughout this area. So understanding that, keeping elected officials informed of what's happening, because there's a lot of confusion at that initial phases of an event like this, and sorting the rumors out and getting the facts straight so that people can take appropriate steps to protect the community.
Well, one thing that I mentioned to all of you before we started the show today, too, in preparing for the show, we would ask your offices, so how did the city, the county, the port find out about this? And all the reactions we got were on television. And that surprised a lot of us in our office, even though it seems obvious. I think there's a sense we believe that there is information coming down from federal government smoothly to these different lesser governments, smaller governments. True or false?
Well, information does flow down, but people who provide the information want to make sure that it's accurate before they put out rumors. So, there was a lot of communications, but there were a lot of unknowns. So, we did the same thing in Houston. We began identifying what our critical infrastructure was, and we began making sure we had a lot of uniformed police presence out there, providing protection, because we didn't know what was going to be next. We put our helicopters up watching the infrastructure, the petrochemical plants along the ship channel. We felt that was critical infrastructure, our water supplies, our airports. So we began looking at all the critical infrastructure first to make sure we provided some protection for those issues, and then began evacuating people out of downtown.
Do we know if there were any credible threats to this area during that time? I mean, I remember hearing Transco, Williams Tower was a target, and things like that. Was that just rumor mill going, or was there anything serious that we were in trouble about?
Well, I think you looked at what happened in New York, and they went after a skyscraper, so obviously you begin being concerned about your tall buildings, but then when the Pentagon was hit, then that's infrastructure, so then you begin being concerned about that. So then the other thing we did as the day progressed and we realized what we were dealing with, that we were dealing with an al-Qaeda type attack, we began having our officers start reaching out, looking for suspicious activity, reporting that activity, pushing it up to our investigators and our criminal intelligence division, that we could then follow up on this information. It was something we're doing now, is see something, say something, look at suspicious activity and try to react to it.
Mm-hmm. What about something like the ship channel? I mean, you have this threat going on in New York and Washington and Pennsylvania, and you think to yourself, we have this huge opening that exposes us to the rest of the world through the ship channel. How can you possibly check that?
Well, post 9/11, the Coast Guard's come up with a system called MARSEC, Maritime Security Levels. And the port is normally at MARSEC 1, which has a standard of care for security. If there's an attack, you can ramp it up to MARSEC 2 or MARSEC 3, which increases the security requirements for the facilities and the ships on the ship channel. Back when 9/11 happened, the initial reaction was to ground all the airplanes. My father was actually on an airplane on final approach into Dulles in D.C. when the attacks happened. And the plane got turned around. The pilot put the AM radio on the intercom system so everybody could hear what was happening, and the plane ended up landing in Indianapolis. It pulled on to the grass in the middle of the tarmac next to about 6 other planes, and other planes just kept lining up next to it. So the initial response was to ground everything, shut down all the ports across the nation until we figured out what was going on. Since that time, as we get intelligence on specific threats or threats to different sectors of the transportation, let's say it's a train, let's say it's ferries, we have become much better at increasing security in that segment and not just blanket shutting everything down. But at the time, it was the right move until we found out what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Today, we'll jump ahead to today now. It has been 10 years. We have seen lots of different things happening. I think the thing people are most aware of is at airports, the security and how that changed. That's something concretely they can see and feel and realize how it changes their lives. What has happened, though, city, county, port-wise, that has been implemented that leads us to feel things are in a better place today if something were to happen?
Well, I think the big thing is the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and what that has done throughout the nation it's fairly standardized how jurisdictions respond. We have the National Incident Management System to where everybody now responds in the same way, has the same management structure. We're working on interoperable communications, and there are a number of things that are going on that makes us much safer today than we were back 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mark, tell me, right now we hear California, there is an attack. What happens in Houston? What happens in Harris County? What's the first thing that goes on?
If we have credible intelligence that's indicating that there's been an attack in California, we immediately will activate the Emergency Operations Center. And we will be in communication with our partners throughout the entire region. And we work closely with not only the 34 cities within Harris County and the HGAC region, multiple counties, but the state, as well as our federal partners, to make sure that we are acting appropriately. We'll be communicating with the port and understanding what those risks and threats are so that there's actionable plans that are in place that each of our partners now know how to implement and put in play.
Is there something in place right now where they are checking threats, fielding threats, dealing with, especially with the anniversary upon us? Is it at a heightened point of paying attention to what's going on, or is it business as usual?
I don't necessarily think that it's a heightened, it's an improved in communication and coordination with the Houston Fusion Center, which works with multiple law enforcement agencies and coordinating intelligence and sharing information, and is being part of an interoperable communications plan across a region so that we have real-time capabilities and coordination. We're fortunate to live in the area we live because we know each other by face and by name. It didn't take a terrorist event to cause that to happen. We have many natural disasters here. So we know how to coordinate, communicate. We know what resources that we have, and we've done a very good job of that for a variety of emergencies as well as disasters.
Do we kick in the same plan basically that we have for hurricanes coming? Is it all very similar, or is it very different in terrorist attack?
I think that the plans themselves are overlap one another because you're still communication, so it doesn't matter what the impact is. Different players have different roles in the partnerships. Obviously, in a terrorist event, it's going to be very law enforcement centric with the federal government emphasis on how we protect our communities and what we're going to do. But recovery becomes equally as important. The public is looking how are we going to implement those plans and get back to normal as quickly as possible.
Captain, when we come to today from what happened in the past, and I have a vision, I'm not sure it's accurate, of the port, and I see lots of containers sitting there, miles of containers, boats coming in, all this. How do we know what's in everything that's there, and how safe is all of that?
All right, there's a lot of different entities involved in that and a lot of different pieces. Following 9/11, there was the Maritime Transportation Security Act of 2002 that was passed that specified security requirements for facilities and vessels. Vessels out there now have a vessel security plan. Facilities have something called a facility security plan. It's a document that each one of those has to live by. So in the past, you might have had an oil spill response plan or something of that nature. Now you also have a security officer on the ship. Might be a collateral duty, not full-time, but somebody is assigned to that duty. Same thing on a facility. There's a facility security officer that goes with the facility security plan. My position at the port did not exist when 9/11 happened. We had a police force and a police chief. We did not have a manager of the security function. And so that's really an outgrowth of 9/11.
Talk to me a little bit about technology. I've watched enough TV to see they've got things that can scan every item in a container that comes in, every item on a boat. Everything can be barcoded or RF and all of that. What do we have in place that secures what's coming in?
That is Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and they're responsible for the screening of the containers that come into the port. The balance you have to strike is whether you can keep commerce flowing and also provide that level of security. You could stop every container that came in, open it up, and search it from stem to stern. That would not facilitate commerce. That would bring us to a grinding halt. Right now, the containers, every container that comes in is screened through different portals. I won't go into all the details today, but before you go out the gate, it goes through some portals, and that container is checked as it is outbound and offloaded from the ship. We also have protocols in place overseas at the point of origin in some countries, so before the container is even loaded on a ship to come to the United States, it's also screened.
Okay. From a city point of view, and I don't mean disrespect when I ask this question, but is the port our biggest weak spot? Is that the biggest open hole we need to be concerned with, or does the city look at other things?
I think you have to look at the big picture. When Al-Qaeda has been weakened by a lot of the attacks that have occurred over in Afghanistan, and what we're concerned about now is more or less the smaller participant, someone who's bought into the ideology. And so I think what we've seen over in Europe in terms of radicalization, so those are things that we're worried about now. So we spend a lot of time in terms of equipping our police department to deal with explosive, for instance, suicide bomber kind of incidents. So you have to look at the big picture of what could do the most damage versus what is most probable in terms of what might happen. So you have to have that balance about do we try to protect against the big bang, or do we go after maybe what's more probable in terms of a lone wolf type of attack?
So how do you strike that balance?
You just do. You try to have an even approach to your strategy and your plans. And getting information, intelligence is important, and we're getting ready to roll out a program in conjunction with the Department of Homeland Security to the general public to see something, say something, because we know that when terrorists plan events, they do certain things. They rehearse, they plan. There's things that happen, and so things that look suspicious to you might be suspicious, and we need to follow up on that. You can't connect the dots if you don't have the dots.
Right. Mark, it's been 10 years, and if it weren't for the anniversary right now, which is bringing a lot of attention back to this, have we become somewhat complacent because there hasn't been a major attack?
I would say no. I think that I think the public is very aware of the risks and the threats that exist. I think that they feel that they play a critical role in the information and the information sharing. We've had various incidents across the country that have occurred, and because of citizens of this nation telling somebody something, we would be able to prevent something greater from happening. So I don't think it's complacency. I think that everybody understands what occurred that day and how it changed our lives forever, not only as a resident of our community, but as in the government as well. It's not about one agency. It's about partnerships, and that partnership is from one law enforcement agency to another, one government agency to each other, but it's also about you as a resident of this community, a homeowner, knowing your role and responsibility to be able to be part of the solution, be part of that.
One area that was of great concern when all of this was going on back on 9/11 and continues to be of concern today is parents when their children are at school. They are out of touch with their children. If something were to happen, concern being, where do I go? What do I do? How do I know my children are being cared for? What policies are in place that you folks know about? And I don't know if directly you deal with schools or if that's a school area, but from what you know, what is in place for parents?
Well, one of the public preparedness information we put out is have, and this applies to all disasters, have a plan, build a kit, stay informed. And so that first piece, have a plan. If something happens, know what you're going to do. Have your family know what they're going to do. Have your children know what you're going to do. So, different schools have their own policy about whether children should be picked up or not. But at the end of the day, the parents, the family needs to have a plan and know what they're going to do in any type of emergency.
As I understand, you're supposed to have a meet-up place where if the family should get separated, where they're going to meet back together at some point.
Well, or for older people, a person out of town that you can call who would then know. Where everybody's at. So if you're separated, if the father's at work, the mother's at work, child's at school, they get separated, know this person out of town that you can call and say, this is where we're at.
Mark, I cut you off a second ago.
We work very closely with the Department of Education through Harris County and all of the school districts to make sure that they have plans in place and understand what their roles and responsibilities are to do if and when something occurs, from an active shooter to chemical releases, if they go to a lockdown or shelter in place, making sure that they've done their evacuation plans, and we're in constant communication with them. So we understand what it is the schools will do, and most importantly is making sure that information is being provided back to the parents so they understand that the schools do have a plan and understand what the teachers will do on campus and how they interact with the community on a regular basis. Because as Dennis mentioned at the beginning of the show, all disasters are local, and it could be just around a school district itself, and that's all that's being dealt with, and it's information. And I think parents have played a critical role in learning what those plans are.
Mm-hmm. We talked a bit about the port, but also the airports. And as I understand, the city does have a manager that handles our airports also. That's part of the city. And I don't know if Harris County also does as a county position. But as far as that, what are the plans in place should something happen for our airports?
Well, obviously the airport works with TSA. That, you know, there's a division of responsibility. Everything past the gate that goes to the airport, to the airplanes, or the TSA and the government's responsibility. The local police are responsible for what happens before you get to that security gate. So there is a clear line of responsibility, and they work together, and they exercise every year in terms of different types of scenarios.
Now, we know we had the scale of the threat levels, the different colors of threat, and then that got changed recently to only three platforms or spaces. Can someone explain what we currently have as a threat gauge, and does that actually tell us anything? And I'll toss it out to any of you.
Well, I think the intent is, rather than have an across-the-board orange or red in terms of putting everybody on alert, the intent is try to focus on the sector that is at risk, and have a time frame at which time you will pull the alert, so that we don't go on for months and months and months like we did with yellow and orange.
Right, and as I understand it, they put out all the information they can in a bulletin when the level is changed, with a specific, as Dennis said, a sunset date, a drop-dead date, and it's based on whether it is probable or imminent, or the different levels now, normal, and then moving up to probable and imminent. So you have the best information you have, as specific as it can be, with a drop-dead date on the other end of it.
Do we live in a time where normal means vigilant, normal means always watching? Is that our relaxed state now, is to always be on top of something?
Absolutely. You asked earlier about coming up on the 10th anniversary. It's going back to some of the comments that were made earlier. It's everybody's responsibility. It's not the school teacher, it's not the parent, it's not the government. It's everybody's responsibility together. And as we move forward into this weekend that's coming up, awareness. I'm not sure there's a threat on the horizon that we talked about, but there's a heightened awareness amongst everybody as to what is out there. See something, say something. I think people are much more in tune with the possibility, and they're just much more aware, and I hope that's what 9/11 reminds them of, is to be vigilant and not be complacent.
Sometimes my job is to ask the obvious dumb questions, so here we go. What are we being aware of? What should we really be watching? And how do you know? And I think from people I know, they feel uncomfortable reporting something. They don't know what to report. It might seem strange to them, but then how do we know it's a threat? Any tips on how to do this?
Well, I think the see something, say something is based on suspicious activity. If you see something that you think is suspicious, then you report it to the authorities, and then they can determine, either through follow-up or based on current information, know what to do with that information. So nothing is insignificant, and that's one of the things we're going to be putting out. If you think it's suspicious, say something, and we'll look into it. That doesn't necessarily mean a police officer will be dispatched to talk to you, but sometimes it's just a matter of collecting the information. And sometimes it's a matter of, gee whiz, we've got 5 or 6 reports of people taking photographs at this particular refinery. Maybe we need to look into that. Maybe we need to make sure that the facility manager knows that somebody's watching this property. So some very common sense things can occur.
We mentioned refineries, and I know we're running out of time, but how about a weakness of our refineries, Mark?
I think that the refineries are a critical partner to us. So I think they've done a very good job of adding to their internal perimeter security, understanding their roles and responsibilities. They have that as a private sector partner to secure their facilities, and it's coordinating outside that fence line with local government, with the U.S. Coast Guard and the port security to understand what it is we're doing in conjunction with each other to make our port a safe area. Accidents are going to happen. That's going to occur. And it's being able to report to the right people and keep everybody informed.
In the last 30 seconds we have, Captain, I'll let you wrap this up. Your feelings on the difference of where we are today to where we were 10 years ago?
We are light years ahead of where we were. And again, like I said earlier, it's trying to find that balance between facilitating the flow of commerce, getting people on board the airplane through the airport security in a timely fashion, but also providing for the security that we need for our nation to ensure this doesn't happen again.
And in a one-word answer, Dennis, have we just been lucky, or is it the work of gentlemen like you that has made us safe?
I think there's been a lot of work to make us safer. No question about it.
Gentlemen, thank you very much, and hopefully we won't need to have you back for any serious reason for a long time to come. Thank you very much. Now, each week we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org/Houston8. There you can read about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. Programming note, we will be off the air for the next few weeks to make room for our September membership drive. Then, during the month of October, Houston 8 will take a break while we present the 2011 City of Houston municipal election debates, which I will be moderating. We hope that you'll join us for those, and then tune back in for Houston 8 after the elections. That does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week.